Suzanne takes you down to her place near the river.
Remote viewing is an ability that we all have to quiet our minds and describe and experience what's going on in a distant place or in the future. People want to know, how do you teach ESP? And I said, I'm not teaching anything. I simply show up and give people permission to do something that they already have the capability of.
That was Russell Targ, our guest for today's podcast.
And you want to travel with her, and you want to travel blind, and you know that she will trust you.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Taylor. Welcome to my podcast, Searching for Unity in Everything, Meaningful Conversations with Meaningful People. How can we turn the world around? Can we turn the world around? Everything I've done has been in that pursuit. Buoyed up by that famous quote by Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. My guest, Russell Targ, is a very old friend who's doing what I'm passionate about, which is to open people's minds to the reality that is beyond the limited perspective most people hold. He's well equipped to blow people's minds because as a physicist, with credentials from having helped develop the laser, he's grounded in what gives us our perception of the material world as what we base our worldview on. But he has taken off from there to apply scientific methods to what isn't material at all, giving verification to the fact that we also live in psychic space. It's the territory of his other body of work with what's called remote viewing, where after some 20 years of work with it funded by the CIA, he's gone on to teach people how to do it and to produce a documentary, Third-Eyed Spies, available now on Amazon Prime, that's all about this work. So, old friend Russell, in studying physics, obviously you had a respect for the significance of the material world. So what was your entree to what lies beyond that?
Well, I have a very high respect for the material world. Having ridden a motorcycle for several decades, I was eager to stay alive, so I pay good attention to the material world. But I got into the non-material world as a child. I was always very good at cards, card games, and I got into card tricks. And since I grew up in New York, I could visit Hubert's Flea Circus, which you possibly remember from New York on 42nd Street. And you could stand in front of the magician and watch him doing magic. Right in front of you, he could make the cards disappear. And then I could go to the professional magic shops and see the tricks and buy them. And in due course, I was doing magic on the stage. And the thing that I experienced from time to time is a 13, 14-year-old, I was pretending to read minds, of course, mental magic. And from time to time, I would have a clear impression of what the person's house looked like or what the situation was. So I could fold in this flash of surprise ESP and incorporate that into my mind-reading magic trick. And I've subsequently talked to people like Melbourne Christopher, great American magician, and Kreskin, who's still practicing magic. And he said, oh yeah, occasionally in the middle of a trick, you'll get a clear image of some other thing, and you just fold that right into your magic. And sometimes it could save the trick. So even though magicians tend to be hostile to ESP, the preeminent magicians that I've spoken to, in fact, Melbourne Christopher was a consultant to our SRI program because it was important that we need never be fooled by a magician.
So is that really what got you open to the alternative world, we might say, or the bigger world beyond our material one?
I was part of an event which you could call a magical event. I was doing an art opening on Madison Avenue for the artist John Groth, who had just come back from Europe. And I had done some magic as I was asked to by my father, who was a distinguished publisher. And I did my 20-minute act. And then his wife said, well, we're going to give away one of John's beautiful paintings, and our young magician will stir up the little coupons in the big snifter, and we'll pull out one. So I pulled out one and read the number 18429. Who has that lucky ticket? Nobody said anything. So it occurred to me that I had a ticket in my pocket, and indeed I had pulled out my ticket. So the big groan, everybody is very pissed off. This kid is taking this beautiful picture, which if we were on video, I could show you. Beautiful picture, watercolor that John had done in Europe. He said, no, we can't do that. Let Russell keep the picture. We'll pick out another ticket. So stirred up the tickets. I picked out another one, 38741. Who has that? And from the back of the hall, I hear a familiar voice that, oh my God, and that was my father. The second ticket I picked out was my father's ticket. And now everyone is deceased except me. So I have these two beautiful watercolors from John Groth. And we could do, I know you're a math whiz, you can quickly multiply 1 over 150 and square that. You get a number like 1 in 20,000. So those are the odds of my picking out the two tickets. Was definitely not a trick. So you have to figure out, was that magic? Was that ESP? Jung would call that a meaningful coincidence. Jung was very interested in meaningful coincidences. He was famous for a book he wrote with Linus Pauling on that subject. That was the first magic that I had ever seen that I had my hands on, where some truly desired but unexpected event took place right in front of me, undeniable.
That is such a wonderful story. I don't even quite know what to make of it all. However, did that lead you right into investigating more? And how did you start tuning in to the interior, unseen world?
Well, the whole I don't know how long a story you want. Robert Rosenthal, who's now a distinguished psychologist, once came into my high school biology class with a deck of ESP cards, Rhine cards. And the short story is he showed us what Rhine was doing with the circle, square, wavy lines, crosses to measure people's ESP at Duke University. And as a 14-year-old, that excited me. So I could go right down to the Society for Psychical Research in New York. And New York being what it is, I could say, I'm Russell Targ, and I'm interested in ESP. What do you have I could read? And I got introduced to the journals of the American Society for Psychical Research, and I then assiduously read those through college. And in graduate school, a friendly person took me to the Theosophical Society in New York City. And I met a lot of people who had psychic abilities passionately in their lives. Dora Kunz was a psychic healer, invented therapeutic touch, in fact. She was famous for that. And Helena Blavatsky was passionate about psychic abilities, although deceased at the times. And they showed me that in the late 1800s, Blavatsky had two of her famous psychics, Charles Leadbeater, who was an artist, and Annie Besant, who was a prodigious psychic, looked at a block of paraffin and were able to describe the hydrogen atoms in the paraffin. The periodic table was just discovered, and Blavatsky, who was a brilliant woman, she gets a bad press, but she's a brilliant woman. Blavatsky wanted her psychics to look at this block of paraffin, which contained lots of hydrogen. And Annie Besant, she drew a hydrogen molecule containing two hydrogen atoms, and each proton she showed contained three little balls, which she called fundamental atomic units, and each of the little balls was connected to its partner by a line of energy. And she had that drawn and published in 1895 in Lucifer. There was the Theosophical Journal, an article called Occult Chemistry. So she exactly drew what we would have today. 3 quarks connected by 3 gluons. 100 years before there were any gluons, before there were any quarks, before there were any isotopes of hydrogen. She drew this in 1895 because that's when the article was published. And in fact, in my recent book, The Reality of ESP, I went to the New York Public Library and they had to find this 1895 Journal of Lucifer for me so I could photograph this original drawing by Annie Besant and then publish that with a contemporary drawing of a quark. And she essentially drew exactly what today's drawing would be for the structure of an atom.
You know, isn't that fascinating? I actually had not heard that story.
So I have a lot of stories I could tell you, Suzanne. We ought to get together more frequently.
So, Russell, you mentioned in passing, because we haven't identified it yet, SRI, where you did your remote viewing lab that the CIA funded. What got the CIA involved? I mean, this is serious.
Well, the CIA got involved through another character who you may know called Andrea Puharich. Andrea was a talented physician and biophysicist who was interested in psychic stuff and magic mushrooms. And he got the CIA interested in the 1960s in work that was going on in the Soviet Union. Andrea was well connected, traveled the world, and he felt that the CIA should know about what's going on in Russia. And that was all through the 60s. And I knew Andrea during that period. We were friends. And in 1972, I had been doing laser work for 15 years. And when I went to graduate school, I was aware that I couldn't make a living doing parapsychology. I knew parapsychologists, and all of them were impoverished doing other stuff. No way to make a living doing ESP research. So I did my other thing, which was going to lasers, which I was very interested in at the time. But after 15 years, I decided that I had already built an ESP teaching machine, for example, and I showed that to Werner von Braun, and he did very well with this 4-choice gadget, which you can now download from the internet. It's called ESP Trainer. Go to the Apple Store, and as a gift, as my gift, you can have this little electronic application on your telephone and teach yourself how to do remote viewing, psychic abilities. So von Braun was interested in that and had a promise for support from NASA. And about that time, I went to the CIA and said, I think that I could help your agents find out where people are hiding or where kidnapped Americans are, because I had entree to the CIA since I had built laser stuff for them in the 1960s. I think that a aspiring ESP researcher can't just walk into the CIA and said, how would you like to support my parapsychology work? I think you would not get past the front gate. So I said, I have something new for you. And I start out with my ESP game, which I could lay on the table as an actual object. And at the time when teaching machines were of great interest, in the 1970s, the idea of teaching stuff with machines was au courant. So I had this self-contained, pretty nice looking gadget which could offer you feedback and reinforcement and develop your psychic abilities. And I said, I want to do that and also measure brain waves so we know when people are functioning psychically, and I can help you find your missing agents and kidnapped other people. And I was able to take the CIA promise and the NASA promise together with astronaut Edgar Mitchell and go to Stanford Research Institute, who knew me from my laser work, and together with Hal Puthoff, who was another laser physicist, we were able to convince Charlie Anderson that it would be appropriate for Stanford Research Institute to support a ESP investigation to see if we could do something useful for the government, and along the way, perhaps to understand it. And Anderson foolishly said, well, we can support that at a low level, but you have to be discreet. So in subsequent years, SRI supported us, And our little secret program probably got 95% of their publicity and 1% of their money. But they did support us for 2 decades.
Now, I know you were doing spying during the Cold War on the Russians. Why don't you, for a layperson who would not know what remote viewing was, which was your specialty, why don't you explain what remote viewing is, why it worked, what it actually is?
Remote viewing is an ability that we all have to quiet our minds and describe and experience what's going on in a distant place or in the future. For an example would be, I have something on my table here. You can't see it because it's outside the view of the camera. And I would say, I have something interesting here, Suzanne. Can you tell me what you're experiencing with regard to my thing? If you have an instructor who really believes that that can work, that instruction that I just gave you is all it takes. I have an object that needs a description. Don't try and name the object. Just tell me about the surprising images that show up in your awareness. It's an ability we have, and my function as a teacher, people want to know, how do you teach ESP? And I said, I'm not teaching anything. I simply show up and give people permission to do something that they already have the capability of.
You know, I can actually speak for how effective that is because I've been in your workshops, and it is astonishing how accurate you can be describing something you can't see. But talk about now remote viewing per se. That's that psychic realm where you can navigate without knowing what you're doing. Talk about what that is, what the protocols are, how you do it.
Well, we had Ingo Swann working with us, the famous New York psychic and a visionary artist. And in the beginning, the two laser guys wanted Ingo to say, is the laser turned on or is it turned off? What's the picture in the next room? And Ingo said, if I want to see what's in the next room, I'll go into the next room. What you guys are asking me to do is a trivialization of my ability. And I'm going to leave if you don't give me something worthwhile. I can focus my attention anywhere on the planet. So he said, why don't you have somebody hide in the Bay Area, and I'll tell you what it looks like where they're hidden. And we did a number of trials like that with Ingo, and he did superlatively well. And about that time, Pat Price, a retired police commissioner, gave us a call. And he said, well, I've been doing that all my life to catch criminals. I'm the police commissioner in the city of Burbank. And Price turned out to be astonishingly accurate. So he took a look 10 miles down the road and made a drawing of architectural accuracy, what was there. And we know it wasn't the trick because this was overseen by Kit Green, who was our CIA contract monitor. So I asked Pat, Hal Putoff and Kit Green have gone to hide somewhere. I have no idea what the target pool is. Could be anywhere in the Bay Area. They're at their place now. Tell me what kind of pictures show up in your mind. He said, well, this is some sort of recreation area, or more likely it's a water purification plant. I see this square pool and this round pool, and then there's this giant water tank way up in the sky, about 75 feet tall. And he drew all that stuff. And then we got to the place, and it was a swimming pool complex. And the two pools were exactly as he drew it, but there's no water tank. So he said, okay, what Ingo Swann called analytical overlay. Once he decided it was a water purification plant, he added in the water tower. That's what we said by way of forgiveness. A decade later, the city of Palo Alto sent all the residents a picture book celebrating what Palo Alto looked like 100 years ago when it was formed. And Rinconada Park, where this thing all taking place, was indeed a water purification plant. And the tallest thing in the city of Palo Alto were the two water tanks, exactly where Price put them. So he drew the swimming pools, and he added in these giant water tanks that used to be right at the end of the swimming pool, and he drew them. He had the height correct and had them in the right place.
This is a wonderful commercial for your movie because I know these stories are in your movie, Third Eye Spies. It will be on our information page about this podcast, and it is streaming free on Amazon. Why don't you also tell us some of the examples during that program, then when you were working with the CIA, of some very specific things that you accomplished for them?
Well, our film opens up with an airplane flying across the screen, and Jimmy Carter is on camera saying the most amazing thing that happened while I was president is that the Russians crashed an airplane in the jungle of northern Africa, and we couldn't find it because our satellite photography doesn't penetrate the canopy of the jungle. So we tried everything we could, and we knew that the CIA had some psychics in California. So we asked them to see if the psychic could find it. And the psychic came back with geographical coordinates marked on a map. And the next day, the CIA sent a helicopter into Zaire. And as they landed the helicopter in a clearing corresponding to the coordinates, there were natives on the path dragging metal out of a creek, and the airplane was right within a mile of where the helicopter touched down. The CIA was able to rescue Russian code books from this downed Russian airplane. Our movie, The Third Eye Spies, is really the true story of CIA psychic spying. So we had unusual testimonials from CIA contract monitors on camera saying, yes, we were there and it really happened.
Why don't you tell one more? We can't go into all the successes because it would take too long. Why don't you tell about the Patty Hearst story? I find that one quite fascinating, and then we'll move on from there.
I guess the beginning of 1974, Patty Hearst was kidnapped. Patty Hearst, of course, the daughter of William Randolph Hearst Jr., the publisher of the San Francisco Examiner, famous wealthy man, city of Palo Alto. And his daughter was kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley. She was a 18-year-old student. No one had any idea where she was, who kidnapped her, what went on. So the Berkeley police were clueless in the true sense. So they called Stanford Research Institute and said, we understand you have a ESP program. Is there somebody there who could help us find the heiress who is kidnapped? It's a big embarrassment to the city that we can't find her. So my partner, Hal Putoff, and I and Pat Price drove to Berkeley and walked in the police station, and they said to Price, oh, we're glad you're here. We have a lot of questions we want to ask you. And Price, who is truly a no-nonsense policeman, he said, let me just show you how we do this. Give me your mug book, the picture book with all the usual suspects. So he pulled out this big loose leaf binder, and Price turned the pages one page after another and put his fingers on a picture of a guy and said, this is the ringleader, Donald DeVries. And they said, well, we know who he is. In fact, he walked away from Folsom Prison where he was in a minimum security confinement, and he just escaped about a year ago, and we haven't seen him since then. And there's something about Lobo. Lobo, of course, is Spanish for wolf. One of the other ringleaders was Willie Wolf, who turned out to be a boyfriend for Patty Hearst. So within 10 minutes of being in the police station, Price had grabbed truly out of the air the name of the ringleader and one of the colleagues of the kidnapped crew. And Price was able to tell us this isn't an ordinary kidnapping. These guys are political. They have something else in mind. But it's not just a kidnapping for money. This is some other political thing. And I suppose you want to know where the car is. I can tell you that the car, the white station wagon, about 50 miles north of here, parked on the left side of the road, across from a diner by some big gas storage tanks. And one of the detectives who was with us said, well, I know where that is. It's near my house in Vallejo. And they dispatched a cruiser. And 10 minutes later, they said, we've got your car, and there's still cartridges on the floor, so we know it's the right car. That was verified, and we went out in that direction And the policeman said, but we've got a tip that they're in a shack in the hills of about Berkeley. Mr. Targ, would you like to go to the shack with me? I said, sure, I'm happy to do that. So the detective and I drove up to the hills of Berkeley and parked in front of this shack in the foothills. And he said, do you know how to fire a gun? And I thought this is going to be very interesting. I said, yes, I know how to fire. I own an automatic. I do know how to fire a gun. So he hands me his big police revolver, and not realizing that he's handing his revolver to Mr. Magoo, who's a legally blind motorcyclist. So I now have his revolver in my hand, and an unsuspecting policeman, trusting Magoo to cover his back, went out and kicked open the door, and of course they had already left and weren't there. And we show that happening in the film, tell the story of Magoo regarding the policeman.
Oh, that is such a wonderful story. I want our listeners to understand you are legally blind, but that doesn't mean you can't see. I know you for these thick glasses you've had, and I know you can read and see and manage, although I'm sure with difficulty. Nonetheless, it hasn't fazed you at all. I know adversity kicks people into extraordinary performance sometimes. I wonder if the difficulty with your eyes is anything motivating you to do better in life than most.
Well, my very bad vision undoubtedly stimulated me to study optics in graduate school. Just as people with hearing disabilities get interested in how hearing works. Starting at 5 years old, I was looking through different glasses. Can you see better with this lens? Can you see better with that lens? So I had packages of lenses in my life starting when I was a little child. So by the time I got into graduate school and was studying optics, it seemed like a natural thing for me to be doing. And then I knew Gordon Gould, who's one of the inventors of the laser, and Gould invited me to join his company working on the development of the first laser. So I was quite happy to do that.
Isn't that interesting how life kicks you in directions and, interesting when you look back and try to make sense of it all. Thinking about the success that you had at Sanford Research Institute, in prepping for this, I went on your Wikipedia page and how infuriating it is. This is a quote on your Wikipedia page. Targ's work on remote viewing has been characterized as pseudoscience. You just really want to, golly, come on, and I know that Wikipedia has that issue with everyone who's working on anything that's not scientific materialism in the science category, being plagued by being labeled as pseudoscience. What a shame when our intellectual organizations and sources are clinging to this narrow story. But c'est la vie, so it is. And I know there's been work done on trying to get Wikipedia to change its ways, but so far, no such luck.
But Wikipedia was not a problem because we really were able to do stuff. The CIA didn't care what Wikipedia said.
Yeah.
We could find a Soviet submarine before it was launched, or the downed airplane, or describe the health of an American hostage captured by the Iranians. We even made $120,000 forecasting silver in the silver market.
Yeah.
Forecasting whether silver would go up or go down. So Wikipedia is truly irrelevant. If you've got the goods, that is many, many times I would be sitting with somebody from the government agency and they said, well, can you show us something psychic? And I said, yeah, of course I can. And he said, well, are you going to do the remote viewing? I said, no, you are. And I tell them I anticipated that this was going to happen. So I have an unusual object in my briefcase. Just clear your desk here, pull out your ruled pad, and I have this unusual, interesting object. I'd like you to just make a sketch of the surprising image. He said, well, I don't even believe in this stuff. And I said, well, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not asking you to believe in anything. And the magic words are, only you know the answer. So you see, I'm just asking you to draw a picture that appears in your awareness, that just pops into your imagination. Only you know what that is. So if you draw that, that's all I want you to do. That doesn't sound too hard. And I've done that with people right up to the Undersecretary of Defense.
I presume to success. Yes.
Yeah, I've had a lot of success doing that with people.
Yes, that's wonderful. It's me being irate about Wikipedia. How dare they? You know what? But then I'm irate about a lot of things.
Well, they're trying to save science from us.
Yes, yes.
When we have an explanation for how this works, then these skeptics will go away. The psychic abilities is a non-local ability, which has new currency in modern physics. The idea of non-locality is a phenomenon that's independent of space and independent of time. In physics, if you have two photons who are born together in a entangled way, so that they're like identical twins who go spinning off into the universe, if you grab one of them, you affect the polarization of the other one, even though they can be millions of miles away. So this is a non-local entangled state. So when we have somebody go hide in the Bay Area, and we know that person is, we could say the person in the lab with me is entangled with his friend who went hiding someplace, even though none of us have any idea where it is. So our experiments with remote viewing are definitely demonstrations of a non-local phenomena, because, see, although we have ideas how ESP works, they're complicated and not proven. What we do know, and the important thing is that we do know about psychic ability, is it's no harder to describe what's going on in Soviet Siberia than it is to describe what's going on across the street. Also, we know that you can describe things in the future just as accurately as the present. So once our CIA contract monitor came to us and said, something's going to happen in China 3 days from now at these coordinates. Can you tell us what's going to happen in 3 days? And Ingo Swan was the psychic, and he said, well, this is beautiful. Get me some colored pencils. This looks like a pyrotechnic fireworks display. And he drew a beautiful collection of circles in the sky showing a pyrotechnic display. And he said, and there's a row of trucks off in the background watching this thing. And that's what I see. And of course, that didn't mean anything to me. It probably means nothing to you. But the CIA was very excited. We learned subsequently that what Ingo was asked to look at is a Chinese atomic bomb test. And what Ingo described was an atomic bomb test that failed. If you try and set off an atomic bomb and it doesn't work, all you wind up doing is burning uranium in the atmosphere. And uranium is a pyrophoric material that's like setting a torch to magnesium. When you light uranium, it bursts into flame, different colors, flies up in the air, and you would get exactly the very, very surprising pyrotechnic display that Ingo saw 3 days in the future. And no one in the whole world could possibly have known that because it was a result of a failed Chinese test. So the point is that Ingo could look 10,000 miles in the distance, and 2 days in the future, you can give a perfect picture of what's going to happen at that distant location at that distant time.
Yes, this is the quantum world, yes, that has, become something which we have verified and which is our current state of awareness, which also we could probably talk about for days. I mean, in the future, how can that be? But we best not go down that rabbit hole, probably because I know just so much, and I think you're at the end of my capacity to really be intelligent about this, but it is stunning. I know that this is true, and I know some of the experiments you've done where people do see the future, other ones as well.
This is not a New Age phenomenon.
Yeah.
The Buddhists understood this 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, talk about that, Russell, because I know you're a Buddhist as well, and that's something I want to talk about. How does being a Buddhist, or what about the Buddhist realm, is the parallel to your physics world?
In the principal writing of the Buddha, the Prajnaparamita, it says again and again that for consciousness, there's no separation. And this is elaborated in a big monograph published at the time of Christ called The Flower Ornament Scripture, full of streamers and mountains and colors and all sorts of phantasmagoria, and a few pages describing how when you learn to quiet your mind, you can see into the distance, see into the future, talk to people who are deceased, and do all sorts of other psychic things such as we do in the laboratory. You can diagnose illness, heal the sick, but principally they talk about mind-to-mind connection, just telepathy, clairvoyance, where you can see things in the future, things in the distance, precognition, where you see things in the future, and that's all spelled out in very flowery, luxurious detail in this book at the time of Christ. So it's obvious that they're not kidding around. They expect that when you learn to quiet your mind, you have available to you the connection that corresponds to the non-locality that they were aware of at the time. There's no separation for consciousness.
Isn't that something that what the Buddhists were onto thousands of years ago, modern science, which is our God, has verified? And I mean, this is fascinating. We are living at such an interesting time, really. If we could only, have the positive aspects of it, wouldn't it be wonderful? I want to ask you a little bit, just because he's so popular, and I want to mention Uri Geller. Russell, do you remember some 20 years ago, we had a visitor when you were house guesting with me who came to see if spoon bending was for real, because somebody had tried to hire him to write a biography of Uri Geller, and he didn't want to waste his time if Uri Geller was a fraud. And in fact, he came to visit you. You weren't sure about that. You'd been to a spoon bending party. You thought it was for true. But what he didn't know, he was coming to visit me, because I have this friend, Gary Sinclair, who's down near San Diego, who can bend spoons with alacrity. And in fact, when I do presentations about crop circles, where I try to open people's minds to the fact that these may be coming from another intelligence, I show them this very heavy spoon. We'll put a picture of it up on our podcast page, a stainless steel cooking spoon that right in front of my eyes. Gary walked in the front door. He just bought it. The tag is on it, and it bends into a pretzel. Oh my God, how can that be? And do you remember when this guy came to visit us?
Yes, I remember talking with him.
Jonathan Margolis was his name. The next thing we knew, he'd written the book, and you and I have a credit in it. He's thanking us for authenticating this phenomenon. I
have seen people bend spoons under very good conditions, and a good friend of mine bent a spoon at a party. So next time we went to a spoon bending party, I picked up a aluminum rod, 8-inch aluminum rod. I'm looking at it right now. It's about a half-inch in diameter, something I could not bend normally. In fact, my very strong rowing sons could not bend it. But as I held it by the ends at this party where people were shouting, "Bend, spoon, bend," it just bent in my hand like a screen door spring. So I'm convinced that this is so easy that even a scientist can do it.
What a good statement. Say a little bit about Uri Geller, because people are so fascinated by him. He's got so much controversy about him, whether he's a fraud or not. But obviously, there's ways in which he's absolutely not. But I know you did other experiments with him. There's a video footage that I've seen somewhere that I just love of him guessing where something is in 20 vials of liquid, which vial has something in it that's alien or foreign, and then he does it over and over again. He gets it right. What was your impression about Uri Geller?
My impression is that he definitely has telepathic, clairvoyant ability. The experiment we did with him that I liked best is the one that looks most like a magic trick. That is, we had a ordinary 6-sided die, and I put it in my steel filing cabinet, and I would just shake up the filing cabinet with the die in it and ask Geller which side is up. And he did that 8 times in a row without error. We filmed the whole thing. He didn't get to shake the box. He didn't do anything. He just sat there. I would shake the box, and he would tell me which side was up. So that's a hell of a good trick, if that's a magic trick. But we had pictures drawn by an artist, and they were put in a double-sealed envelope. And on camera, I would pull the picture out of my pocket, still in this double envelope, didn't know what it was, and Geller would make a drawing of what the picture was. He was not able to bend anything at SRI, but the things he was able to do, he did under very good conditions. So I would say, yes, indeed, Geller does have telepathic ability. And since numerous other people have demonstrated that they can bend spoons, I have to assume that Geller would not invent a crazy thing like spoon bending if he wasn't able to do it himself.
You know, Russell, I once went to an event, a very large event at Shrine Auditorium or somewhere, and everybody brought their stuff that didn't work, their clocks that didn't work, their mechanical things that, you know, sometimes they wouldn't work. You look at them, you go, it doesn't have the right mechanism. But I was sitting there, and all around me, as Geller did his magic from the stage, whatever, quote unquote magic, these things started working. It was a very spooky experience, actually. And it's so good that he did work with you, because you know that you're not, you know, in on the trick, or you're not tricking. I know that you had a moment of awakening with the basic space of phenomena, that book. I've asked you before, you know, what were your moments of vision and seeing and things that changed you? So can you talk about what that was?
Your friend Ramana, teaching the Ramana Maharshi, which is Advaita Vedanta.
Right, we did a podcast with him, you know. He was, I think, our third one.
The original Ramana Maharshi, had as his principal teaching, you must quiet your mind and discover who you are. And that's my teaching. And then he will help you do that. But he won't help you very much. You have to really do that yourself. An earlier teacher in the 12th century, Longchen Rabjan, the Buddhist teacher, his friends call him Longchampa, wrote this wonderful book, The Basic Space of Phenomena. And that sounds like a physics book. I know, Basic Space of Phenomena tells you how to quiet your mind and discover who you are. Now, this is in the 800s, and he says that who you are is timeless awareness. What that means is that your mind, your consciousness is outside of space and time. That means your basic nature is not meat and potatoes, but your basic nature is outside space and time, so that your awareness is independent of time. That is, you're not limited by cause and effect. So for a physicist to learn that something is not governed by cause and effect is quite shocking. But he says, because your awareness can move independent of space and independent of time, your consciousness, your true nature of self is this timeless awareness. It gives you a sense of freedom, something to meditate on, and a sense of spaciousness, a new picture of who you might be.
So was that your intro to this? Was that what got you?
That was my intro to them. The first thing I read called Dzogchen Buddhism, and he was a early expositor of Dzogchen. Padmasambhava began teaching that. Padmasambhava was in the 12th century, or in the 8th century, brought Buddhism to Tibet. And he talked about naked awareness as well. Padmasambhava, not to tell you more than you want to know, Padmasambhava was really the forerunner of Dzogchen. He said, who you are is this naked awareness, and so forth. But he was still a Hindu. So Padmasambhava's writing is still full of multi-armed creatures and gods and goddesses from the deity-bound religion.
How about your own personal experience where something happened to you can you describe the way it felt when you tuned into things you had not been tuned into before?
Well, the thing that was surprising in reading this book of Longchampa, Basic Space of Phenomena, I was completely unprepared for that. It was given to me by my daughter Elizabeth. The book had just been published, and she was an avid Buddhist practitioner. And I was reading this book, and it's not a long book. I felt that was really extraordinary description of what we think of as self-evident truth. And it was years later I went back to that book, and I couldn't imagine how I possibly understood anything of that, because that was an advanced text. It's full of words that I then understood, but at the time could not have possibly understood. So I just read through the thing they didn't understand, which must have been copious parts, but I got the idea and had the experience. So in reading this book, we would say that I got a transmission from Longchampa because I was sold on what he was teaching, even though I subsequently realized that I could not have really understood what he was teaching because I didn't understand the vocabulary. I couldn't have understood the vocabulary at all. But the teaching was somehow embedded in the book. And subsequently, in reading the jacket flaps from the Lama who was introducing this book, the Lama said, this book is so powerful that simply having this book in your library is sufficient to get the transmission from the Dharma master. So apparently people, I mean, that sounds like silly talk, but that phenomena is available. For example, I studied with an American teacher named Gangaji for many years, and she's another Advaita teacher like Ramana. Oftentimes I would be sitting in the room waiting for her to take her seat, and she would then sit down and say, let's meditate. And frequently one or more people would simply start crying and fall to the floor, overcome with tears and laughter. And Gangaji will say, will somebody please put a hand on that person and ground her? Because what happens is that they made a loving connection with Gangaji, who is just a bundle of love, and she's available to have a loving connection, and a unsuspecting person can suddenly find himself or herself on a love beam with his teacher, and they're suddenly overcome with love, and they have no idea what's going on or where that came from. And I've seen that happen many times.
Oh, these are such unforgettable experiences and such incontrovertible ones, you know, above and beyond our ideas and our intellect and how smart we are. Having these experiences where all of a sudden, oh my gosh, you're in a different place. There's nothing like it to authenticate the fact that the material world is only a small part or only a part of the larger reality.
The teaching from all these people is that who you are is timeless awareness.
Right.
It is to get away from, if you think that what you see in the mirror is who you are, then you're in for a lot of suffering. And the goal for all these teachings is to allow you to escape from ordinary causality and the things that result in suffering and move into a more spacious realm, and that's available.
Right. I also like the authentication that gives for how connected we all are. We're not just separate bodies just walking around bumping into each other. We have this realm where we're all in the soup together, you know. I really like that aspect of contemporary awareness. Russell, one of the things that I'm focused on my website and my body of work, you might say, is trying to see if we can be smart, back to being clever, and come up with evolutionary ideas. What could happen that could change things massively? I mean, the more difficulty we're in, and maybe even a function of the older I get, I want it to happen in my lifetime. I keep looking for these master ideas. You want to speak to your thought about what could massively change things?
Well, the reason that there's so much anger and suffering in America, people are just angry, and that's because they're dealing with insecurity and inequality, which is different than in other countries. In America, people are aware that there's a lot of basic unfairness, as people have a lot of money for which they didn't work, and there are a lot of people who are insecure, paid less than the minimum wage, and are dealing with the threat of food insecurity, threat of poverty, and there's an insecurity in their livelihood and a sense of the unfairness. So I think that until you deal with these ideas of insecurity and inequality, it's going to be very hard to get Americans to do anything together. I was in England in the 50s, for example, and I had a girlfriend in the north of England, and at night I would walk all the way from Hampstead to where I was in Russell Square, several miles across England in the dark, and I had no fear of anything. I was a 22-year-old walking across who knows what part of London, but I was a big Anglophile, and I knew that whoever I would walk into was an Englishman. And although I was an American, I shared that feeling of commonality, shared belief, shared ethics, shared behavior, and I felt that there was no danger. We don't have that phenomena in America because we're such a collection of people who are feeling rightly badly treated and not part of the community.
What are we going to do, Russell?
I think we have to change our government. I was hoping that Hillary would solve that problem.
Next. What about Marianne? I know you're a Course in Miracles student. It's really amazing to me with 8 bestsellers, or 7, whatever it is. Most of the people don't know who she is. How can they not know who she is? She's a cultural phenomenon. And Course in Miracles, I know you were the kind of ringleader of a Course in Miracles study group for a long time.
Yeah, I was very involved in Course in Miracles. Course in Miracles subscribed to the ideas of emptiness that are also core in Buddhism. A core idea in Course in Miracles is that you give all the meaning there is to everything you experience. That is, there's out there things to happen, and they don't inherently have any meaning apart from the meaning that you give them. Everything you experience has only the meaning you give it.
What you learn is when you do the course, which I have also, you take a year and you do a lesson a day. And I did it with a bunch of people 1 year. And what you learn is that you're responsible for your own suffering. It's how you see things, not what it is. It's how you interpret. Would that be a fair kind of simplistic explanation?
Being judgmental of the source of suffering.
Right.
Or for the person doing the judging.
Right. I know you sent me your one-line message to the world because we're collecting them with everyone. I'll read it here and see if you have anything to say any more about it. You said, since we are all created from the same stardust, we can greatly diminish our suffering by moving from our ego-based craving and fear to timeless awareness and freedom. Are you standing by it?
I stand by it.
Okay. And then your mission, you said, I consider that my purpose is to discover my own timeless awareness and then teach that. And I don't even need to ask you because I know that's what you're up to. You're infinitely curious, open, and communicative in a way that really does make a difference to other people. We want to mention before we get off that the talk you did for me when we did a TED program that ended up in a long story of TED thinking you were too far out. I wonder how they're feeling about the fact that you now have 4 million views. I produced the program myself after TED withdrew. And I am so gratified that people are watching the talk that you did, and 4 million and counting. Isn't this the most wonderful thing, really?
And so I pick up about 100,000 persons a month. So it's still in the viral stage after 3 years.
This is beautiful. We will also put a link to that on our podcast page. So I think, Russell, will draw to a close here with my great appreciation. I'm so glad I'm your friend. And I love all the things you've been saying. I hope our audience loves them as much as I do. Thank you so much.
I love our friendship that's been now for a couple of decades.
Really more, I think.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Now Suzanne takes your hand and she leads you to the river.
So, dear listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of Searching for Unity in Everything, meaningful conversations with meaningful people. Do subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any episodes. And check out suspeaks.org/podcast for notes about this one. To make any comments on it, you have to go to our blog on suspeaks.org, where we made a post about this episode. How'd you feel about what you heard? Did you learn anything? Or were you inspired to act in any new way? Or do you perhaps disagree with anything that was said? Also, while you're on our website, do explore and comment on some of the other content. There's a cup of consciousness for everyone.
And you want to travel with her, and you want to travel blind, and you know you can trust her, for she's touched your perfect body with her mind.